I truly love working with caregivers. So I hope I can bring some information that you find practical and will help you through your journey. So with that, I'll give a little bit of an overview. We have about an hour, so I'm going to try to keep this to about 45 minutes to allow for some questions and discussion before moving on to the next session. So this is what we're going to cover. First, we'll start off with actually a self-assessment that I think might make the rest of this talk a little more meaningful and relevant to you, put it in a little bit of perspective. Then I'll review some of my most recent research findings on caregivers of people with dementia. We'll discuss the role of confidence, and then spend the majority of the time talking about wellness and what that means to you and how you can implement wellness into your daily life. And I'll end with trying to entice you to sign up for one of my research studies. But the big finish will be a mindfulness meditation, after which I think we'll all be relaxed and ready for the rest of the conference. So let's start with the self-assessment. So there are many tools available to assess various characteristics of caregivers. This tool is the Caregiver Self-Assessment Questionnaire, and it's concerned with your well-being. So it was developed by the American Medical Association and had some preliminary studies on being reliable and valid. What happens is, as caregivers, you're often so concerned with caring for your relatives' needs that you lose sight of your own well-being. So we're just going to take a moment to answer the following questions. And once you've answered the questions, we'll go over the results. So I'll read each of them, but feel free to go ahead and mark ahead. They're all yes/no questions except for the last two. And they're pertaining to the last week or so. So just if you can just make a little note somewhere, starting with number 1. During the past week or so, I have had trouble keeping my mind on what I was doing. Yes or no? 2, felt that I couldn't leave my relative alone. 3, had difficulty making decisions. 4, felt completely overwhelmed. 5, felt useful and needed. 6, felt lonely. 7, been upset that my relative has changed so much from their former self. 8, felt a loss of privacy and or personal time. 9, been edgy or irritable. 10, had sleep disturbed because of caring for my relative. 11, had a crying spell or spells. 12, felt strained between work and family responsibilities. 13, had back pain. 14, felt ill, and that could be headaches, stomach problems, cold symptoms. 15, been satisfied with the support my family has given me. 16, found my relative's living situation to be inconvenient or a barrier to care. Those were the 16 yes or no questions. The next 2 questions, and the last 2, will ask you to select a number on a scale of 1 to 10. So in 17, 1 being not stressful, 10 being extremely stressful, or anywhere on that spectrum, please rate your current level of stress. Again, 1 is not stressful and 10 is extremely stressful. So select a number for that. And then the last question, 1 being very healthy, 10 being very ill, please rate your current health compared to what it was this time last year. So you have your 16 yes and no's, and you have your 2 questions with a number from a scale of 1 to 10. All right. Now it's time to score. So there's just a couple minor calculations we have to make. Since most of the questions were all negatively phrased, there were 2 that were positively phrased. So we need to reverse those answers. So if you answered yes to question 5, change it to a no. And if you answered no to question 5, change it to a yes. And then do the same thing for number 15. Those are the only 2. So reverse your score for your answers for 5 and 15. And then once you've done that, you can add up all your yes responses. And now I don't want a show of hands. I'm just going to ask you to take note if any of the following are true after adding up all your yes responses. Did you answer yes to either or both questions 4 and 11? Is your total yes score 10 or more? And is your answer to question 17 or 18 6 or higher? So if you answered yes to any of those questions I just asked, just consider checking in with a doctor for a checkup and consider looking into some relief from caregiving or joining a support group. This questionnaire is not meant as a guide. It's just meant as a guide. It should not be used in place of advice from a doctor or a healthcare professional, but it helps us to put things in perspective once in a while when we check in with ourselves and actually answer some tough questions. So consider the tasks you manage as well as the score you received and think, do you need a break? Do you need assistance with transportation? Is there information you need related to finances, support in the home, help with your household maintenance, help with health management, someone to talk to? Or are you a new caregiver who isn't sure where to turn? For information on how to find support in your community, we talked about the area agencies on aging. And there's also the Alzheimer's Association, has numerous resources. And I always pass along their helpline so that people have someone to call at any time. It's available 24/7. It's in the green banner at the bottom of the slide. It's 1-800-272-3900. And I know a lot of people find that very helpful. And kind of that feeling like no matter what time it is, there's someone that's going to answer that call. So now that we have a better idea of where you are on the spectrum of wellness as a caregiver, I think looking at the research will be a little more meaningful. So what we know, and what Donna pointed out at the beginning, is that far too many caregivers of people with dementia are sent home with a diagnosis and little to no training on the progression of the disease or how to manage symptoms that interfere with everyday tasks. So to put that in perspective and to truly understand the enormous impact family caregivers have on our society, last year, family caregivers provided care valued at $250 and $71 billion. And over 83% of help provided to older adults in the US is from you. It's from unpaid caregivers. It's not from healthcare professionals. So we need you to be well. The effects of caregiving include increased stress, increased anxiety, decreased quality of life. And common tasks include activities of daily living, things we do every day, bathing, dressing, grooming, for which many family members, family caregivers, are untrained in. So there's research on environmental-based programs, and those include brief home interventions. For example, there's also psychoeducational programs that focus on stress and coping. And then there's community-based programs that focus on workshop type programs. So my study, the one at the top, that was centered on activity of daily living training in a workshop setting, because there's such a need for this training. And my hypothesis was to examine knowledge and confidence before or pre or before exposure to the training, post or immediately after the training, and then 3 months post after the training. We also looked at burden, depression, quality of life before, and then 3 months after. And this is what we found. And I used these little line graphs here. So I'm pointing to this one right here on the bottom left. In a workshop setting in person at the Alzheimer's Association in Southfield, Michigan, there were 3 training sessions. They were 2 hours long, 1 time a week for 3 weeks. And they focused on communication, feeding, bathing, grooming, dressing, transferring, and toileting. And they were part lecture, part lab. And the lab was when we would practice the techniques that we learned on each other. I also had a control group so that I could compare. And the control group received standard care, which was information that was provided from the Alzheimer's Association after someone contacts them. And it provides the different types of dementias, what the signs and symptoms are, the progression, and community resources. The intervention group, the group that came to my training, showed significantly higher ADL knowledge test scores. So you can see right here, and I think, can you see my arrow when I'm pointing? I hope. The blue and the red, they both got a little below, high 60s on their test. And then the red is the control group, and they didn't learn any knowledge related to ADLs. The intervention group did. They significantly went up. The blue line went up. 3 months later, the blue line lost a little bit, but they were still significantly different than the control group. So we know that training helps, and we know that they maintained the knowledge 3 months post. Now, if we look up here at confidence on the top right, you can see both groups improved, and both groups went back to their pre-test scores 3 months later. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, because some people said, well, there's nothing there because there was no difference between groups, but it shouldn't have been that both groups improved. It should have just been the intervention group. But then why did the intervention group, after learning the knowledge, then go back to their pre-test scores after 3 months? So we'll talk about that on the next slide. But the bottom slide shows quality of life. And it's covered in 4 domains. The first domain, you can see domain 1, 2, 3, and 4. The first domain is on physical health, which includes activities of daily living. And you can see that that was the one domain that significantly differed from before the training to 3 months after the training. So let's talk about what all that means and how it applies to you. So knowledge was stuck 3 months after. It stuck. They learned it and they kept it. if you were in that group that received the training. So we do need to provide information and look at various ways to streamline it because it works. Confidence, though, again, improved for the standard care group who received basic information and available resources. And it did for the intervention group too, but neither of them stuck and went back down to their pretest scores. And when I spoke to my statistics person, she said, well, there's no difference between groups. There's nothing to say here. And I was like, well, hold on. Why did that happen? Why did the control group improve? I expected it from the intervention group, but not the control. And why didn't it stick for the intervention group? So I dug into the program evaluation surveys, and I found that there was highly favorable feedback from both groups. And while both groups reported high satisfaction with the in-person training, having the training in an online format was the overwhelming preference. That leads me to believe that once the training was over, there was nothing else for the caregivers. So their confidence improved because we were there and we spoke to them and we interacted with them and we provided them with information, whether it was about ADLs or whether it was about dementia in general. But then there was no follow-up, no online program that they could check in with and review information on. So we decided to create an online training program. And that's what I'm in the middle of doing right now. But in addition to that, confidence plays such a critical role throughout any occupation, but certainly with caregiving. And when we look at research, a recent study revealed that most caregivers still report inadequate support from primary care on how to manage dementia-related challenges, coupled with low confidence scores on their ability to manage their role as a caregiver. The basic ADLs covered in my study are those tasks that are performed throughout every day. Caregivers performing these tasks need to feel confident to prevent both physical and psychological injury to themselves and the person they're caring for. Furthermore, it's been shown that caregiver confidence in their care recipients' functional abilities leads to greater improvements in activities of daily living. Caregivers of people with dementia not only face a lack of confidence initially, but also throughout the course of caregiving, given that dementia is a progressive disease where function is significantly impaired over time. One of the most important outcomes of caregiver interventions is reducing uncertainty about how to provide care and how reducing that uncertainty can relieve stress and impact confidence. I always tell my students the day before they go out on their first clinical, we do this practice. I say, okay, sit up straight in your chair, roll your shoulders up, back, and down, and walk in confidently. And you'll feel different and you'll look different. Don't walk in with your shoulders shrugged and your head down and your body posture. It's so easily picked up by others, especially your patients. And that's how it is with the care recipients too. When you look confident, even if you don't feel confident, they're more assured. So present yourself confidently when assisting them with tasks that will help them feel a little more at ease. That's a little trick I learned. Another study, one of the more current studies I'm involved with right now, is interviewing caregivers of people who are aging, 60 years or older with a chronic condition. Caregivers of people who are aging comprise the largest group of caregivers and tend to maintain their role for the longest amount of time. The role of caregiving is widely stigmatized as burdensome and undesirable. So the purpose of this study was to identify common themes based on the perceived burden on caregiving for individuals who are aging. And we did that through interviews. There were three main themes that emerged, including life-changing in terms of perspective and positive outcomes, role strain in terms of time and responsibility, depression, fear, and anxiety, and resources and support, and role reversal in terms of life coming full circle and preconceived notions. So contrary to the perceived burden of caregiving, many caregivers felt joy in coming full circle and being able to care for their parent, or in other cases, spouse or close family member of many years. Findings imply that professionals do need to have more resources to support caregivers of the aging. And what we glean most from this is that we need to focus on further exploring how these positive experiences can help aid in the stress management of caregivers, which is what leads us to our discussion on wellness. And before that, just before we talk into wellness, I'm going to just review one thing that I think is very exciting, and I think might make some of you feel excited too, is a new project that I'm on, and I'm co-investigator on with Dr. Arthanat from the University of New Hampshire. This is an NIH study that will develop a robot that combines smart home technology and socially assistive robots to promote aging in place. Our hope is to generate evidence and provide a replicable framework to implement a smart home-based robot technology to promote independence and safety of ADLs, to ease caregiver burden, and to reduce long-term care costs. So, I said that to someone and they said, gosh, remember the Jetsons? Like, who would have thought that, these things are actually happening? And if you think about it, today, here we are on Zoom, telecommunications, and we have electric and even self-driving cars, and now a robot that can potentially help in the future. So it's a 5-year study, so it'll take a minute, but this is on the horizon. All right, so that's the background of my research. That's kind of what's led me to what we're going to talk about today. And it's really this huge focus on wellness, because it's one of those areas where we're training and we're trying to provide knowledge, and it's still very difficult to find a way to get these resources and this knowledge out to you. And in the meantime, we need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and that you're healthy and feeling supported. So we're going to discuss the 7 areas of caregiver wellness. And those are right here: physical, emotional, spiritual, social, vocational, intellectual, and environmental. So we're going to go through each one of these areas and hopefully provide you with some tools and techniques that you can use starting today that can start to hopefully make an impact. So let's start with physical wellness. How many times have you heard you need to exercise and watch what you eat? It's much easier said than done. A lot of times that's because the goal is so high, it's unreachable and defeating when you first give it a try. So when we say exercise regularly, exercise does not mean going to a gym, lifting weights, going to a class. In fact, the best exercise is simply walking. And if you can find 20 to 30 minutes a day to go for a brisk walk, and it doesn't have to be all at one time either. It can be 10-minute chunks, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night. Maybe if you can find 10 minutes in the middle of the day, it will have a great improvement and impact on your health. A brisk walk has many health benefits, so many that I'm actually going to talk about that next on its own separate slide. So we'll move on to eating a balanced diet. I think this can get so complicated that it doesn't work. So if you can just have a visual, kind of like the picture that's provided here. Basically try to cut out white flour and sugar as much as you can and load up on veggies and lean protein. If you take a look at this photo, you'll see it's a bit different than the USDA food plate or the pyramid. It includes the largest area as vegetables, and it also includes physical activity, spirituality, career, and relationships as actually key factors to nutrition. Think of it as feeding your soul along with your body. So try to just keep those few things in mind. More veggies, as many as possible, and the least amount of white flour and sugar as possible. And if you can do that and walk a little bit, that would be a big impact on your nutrition and your overall wellness. Sleep. Sleep is another area that is so critical and goes hand in hand with stress. And research shows that stress and a lack of sleep can actually be more dangerous and unhealthy for us than smoking. So here we are, eating a salad for lunch, trying to stay healthy, skipping on dessert, maybe even walking for 20, 30 minutes a day. But then we stay up all night stressed out. It almost literally negates everything healthy that you're trying to accomplish in your life. We need 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. Even a risk of Alzheimer's increases because sleep drains toxins from the brain and increases amyloid plaques that can cause Alzheimer's. It weakens our immune system because sleep strengthens those vital T cells, which destroy infected cells and fight infection. So in addition, the risk of heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes increase as well. This then leads us to recognizing the signs of illness. Make sure you're going to your annual checkups and following through with screenings that are appropriate to your age and circumstance. Mammograms, colonoscopies, blood tests. These are all critically important to perform as they lead to early detection and increased chances of survival should a diagnosis result. And when something doesn't feel right, it's usually because something's wrong. So make sure you just check in with your doctor and always trust your gut, because that's the best instinct. So of those 4 points we just talked about, I'm going to talk a little bit more about walking, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about sleeping because they're so important and can have such an immediate impact on your wellness. So physical activity, again, it doesn't have to be complicated. Some examples of what regular brisk walking can help you with is maintaining a healthy weight, losing body fat, preventing or managing various conditions, including heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, cancer, type 2 diabetes, improving cardiovascular fitness, strengthening your bones and muscles, improving muscle endurance, increasing energy, improving your mood, your cognition, your memory, and a direct impact on your sleep. Improve your balance and coordination, strengthen your immune system, and reduce stress and tension. Now, the faster and farther and more frequent you walk, the greater the benefits. So even if you just go for a regular old walk, that's wonderful. If that starts to be like, okay, I can up my game a little bit here, you can start to try to walk a little faster, try to walk a little farther, and a little more frequently. So you might start out as an average walker and then work your way up to walking maybe a mile in a shorter amount of time than an average walker, similar to power walkers. So I have that little image on the right there of the slide that shows, if you wanted to, get into that proper positioning of a power walker. But this walking on its own can be a great way to get aerobic activity and improve your heart health and increase your endurance while burning calories. And you can also alternate periods of brisk walking with leisurely walking. That's kind of called interval training. And that has many cardiovascular benefits as well and burns more calories, and can be done in less time than regular walking. But walking also has this ability to clear your mind. When you're stressed, when you feel a little overwhelmed about things, even 5 minutes, just walking around your block if you could. And it has to do with the reciprocal, the opposite actions of your arms and your legs and the fresh air and being outside, or even on a treadmill and not having the fresh air, but still that motion. There's so much information on that, especially even with people who have Parkinson's disease and going out for walks. Just the motions of it help relieve some of their or delay some of their symptoms. So now a little bit more on sleep, because again, this is an area that I think everyone can improve on. It's, I'd say, the most overlooked and understated area of importance and so critical to our health. So I want to spend a little time reviewing the CDC's guidelines for better sleep. Good sleep habits sometimes are referred to as sleep hygiene, and they can improve your health and prevent illness. Some of these habits that can improve your sleep health include being consistent, having a routine. And this isn't just sleep, actually. Having a consistent routine on every day is actually very helpful to you as a caregiver and the person that you're caring for, because it establishes a routine and expectations, and you begin to understand and learn what's coming next, and it decreases anxiety. So being consistent, go to bed at the same time each night if possible, get up at the same time each morning if possible, including the weekends. Now, the bedroom, if you can, keep it quiet, dark, relaxing, and at a comfortable temperature. Removing electronic devices, including TVs, computers, your phone, if possible, or if you don't want to remove it, put it in a drawer so that if you're worried that someone might call and need you, you could still hear it answer, but you won't have that light that pops up that can disrupt your sleep. Try to avoid large meals before bedtime, caffeine and alcohol before bedtime, and exercise. The more you walk, the more you exercise and are physically active during the day, that helps you fall asleep more easily at night. So they kind of go hand in hand. There's also many apps on phones that play white noise, different types of white noise that can help you fall asleep. So you can turn one of those on and put a timer and put it in the drawer and close it. So again, the light's not on, and kind of have that to help. And I know sometimes that can be very helpful. Okay, so now we'll move to the next area of wellness, now that I talked a little bit more about sleep and exercise. So it's emotional wellness. Emotional wellness impacts how you view everything and taps into that mental health. And that's as important as your physical health. So striving to achieve optimism and build your self-esteem and self-acceptance. It's so important to fight negative thoughts and practice and build on the positive. And to be honest, I think the best way to do that is through humor. I work with adults who have high-level brain injuries. So if you were to, pass them in the store or anything, you wouldn't necessarily know they had a disability, but you go to their home and they're challenged with home management tasks, keeping organized, making appointments, keeping up with their emails. But what really what really is a huge challenge for them is managing their frustration. So they're easily frustrated, which turns to anger quickly. Now, I don't have a brain injury, but when I call a number for help and get an automated message, and they connect me to 3 different automated messages, and I never get to a person to actually help me with what I need, I want to scream. So they actually do scream, and they start arguing with anyone who can get on the phone with them, and it's not productive, right? So we need to figure out how do we prevent ourselves from screaming? And one of the best ways to do that is practicing our breath, and learning how to laugh at these situations. Those are actually 2 interventions that we use, and they're extremely effective. So we'll talk about breathing in a little bit. We're going to have a whole exercise on breathing, but laughing can be extremely therapeutic on its own, but extremely helpful to stay positive in very non-positive scenarios. And trust me, I'm not trying to say every day we should wake up and paint rainbows and sunshines and unicorns all over the place. I'm just saying that we can laugh at sometimes awful and depressing situations. They help us get through them without turning negative, because negativity quickly turns toxic quickly. So remember the power of positive. We we come up with jokes to think about. We actually will put the phone on mute and we'll make fun of the situation out loud, and it makes us laugh. And then when they come on, we're in a good mood because we're laughing instead of building up this anger and frustration of just being, passed around from person to person on the phone. That's just, one example. But moving on, balancing, being realistic about your expectations and work at home. When you're a caregiver, you have added responsibilities and pressures. You can't do it all, but you can manage everything and still try to be realistic. We're human. There's only so much that we can do. So being realistic with those expectations and not putting so many expectations on ourselves that we then feel that we're not achieving them and we're not being able to help. So that's very important too. And find what brings you bliss, what brings you joy. Even if it's for 10 minutes, take the time to participate in joyful acts. Sometimes that might be locking yourself in the bathroom and turning on 10 minutes of Netflix on your phone, whatever it is, whatever joy you can find in your day, try to do it and try to practice that every day. Now, most of the time we're encouraging people to spend time socializing, and I'm actually going to talk about that next. But sometimes, to have balance, we need to remember to spend time alone and reconnect with ourselves. So it's important to take a few moments to take time to address your stress levels, such as meditating, breathing, practicing mindfulness that keeps you centered and feeling present. And yes, I know this might sound a little out there, but trust me when I say a few minutes of meditation can greatly decrease your stress levels. And don't worry if you're thinking that you don't know how to practice meditation or deep breathing, because we're going to practice that together in just a little bit. But along with spiritual wellness, it's important to find meaning in life events. Sometimes that can be accomplished through keeping a journal or reflection exercises that you do at the end of each day. Whatever it is, take steps to define your core beliefs and values and how they influence your life, and to dive into your spirituality, whatever it may be. And so you spend that time alone, but balance that with having some social connections, because those play a role in maintaining your optimal health, as well as avoiding isolation, which can really be detrimental. Remember that friendships strongly influence your health. Having one or two people you can talk and vent to, laugh or cry with, or get advice from is very healthy for you. And also consider going places that will help you meet new people. I know this is likely one of the last things on your mind, but meeting new people helps bring new perspectives and learning. So it's definitely something to consider. And we all have talents and skills, but it's important to realize that satisfaction from the work you can do can greatly influence your overall wellness. Those whose work directly impacts the lives of others often realize feelings of self-esteem and accomplishment, as well as having purpose, whether it's volunteering, working, or going to a class to learn something new. That brings feelings of gratification, meaning, and purpose. And intellectual wellness focuses on ways to improve your intellectual abilities and to share knowledge with others. Engaging in activities that stimulate your brain, help it stay strong, and boost your critical thinking skills, including problem solving and being able to adapt to change. Brain games are one of my favorite things to do. There's plenty of apps that can tease your brain and keep you on your toes, but also music, listening or playing or learning how to play an instrument can be satisfying as well. And again, spending time with people who bring new perspective and challenge your intellect is a good thing. And last, we have environmental wellness. This area reminds you to take responsibility for our resources, not only for your use, but to benefit those in the future. Understanding the role you play and the impact you make on the earth can help you feel more connected and contributing to our resources. So enjoy the earth, participate in healthy earth measures, enjoy the outdoors, the fresh air, the sunshine and the rain to help you feel grounded and centered. So these are the 7 areas of wellness for caregivers, not for you to say, whoa, I have a lot of work to do. It's more so to point out a few things that you may identify as lacking in your life and give you encouragement on ways to bring more peace, health, and happiness into your life. And with that said, I have a way for you to meet new people and feel productive in some research studies if you are interested, but I have a couple going on right now, and if anyone's interested, I'll have my contact information up at the end. Feel free to send me an email or give me a call, but they can be done distance as well. So there's that option, or in person. So I just wanted to put that out there. And to wrap up with a new lab that I'm creating at Wayne State that will be both in person and we'll be able to reach people online as well. And the whole basis of it is on some grant work that I'm doing right now, and another grant that I have out to specifically reach out to caregivers of chronic conditions in medically underserved areas, as well as all caregivers, to focus training on sleep, nutrition, and mental health. So once this is up and running, we'll have a place for in-person and online consultations, so that caregivers have the skills and knowledge to confidently advocate for themselves and manage their own care. So here's the fun part. Here's the end. We're going to practice some breathing, and then I'm going to play a mindfulness meditation. I was going to do it, but then I thought you'd probably be tired of my voice by the end of this, so I'll have someone else do it. So first, let's learn how to breathe. This is not something that you can just turn on. It actually does take practice. And I come from a full Italian family, so there's a lot of yelling. It's all loving, but it's very loud. And I've had to train myself to breathe, and I'm good at it now. And my kids even make fun of me because I'll be sitting at the kitchen counter and so they'll be starting to argue and I'll just take a deep breath and they're like, here goes mom, inhale, exhale. But it did take practice, but now it's a habit. I don't even think about it. I just do it. I just take these deep breaths and it really helps me from losing it sometimes. So, and it is evidence-based. I know, you might be thinking breathing. Okay, well, we all know how to breathe, but we're going to learn how to do diaphragmatic breathing, and it may increase physiological stress measured by blood pressure, respiration, and cortisol levels. That's actually science, and psychological stress as well. So this is so important because we know chronic stress puts our health at risk. So take a look at the blue point here. I'm going to say two things before we start. The speed of the breath is more important than the depth of the breath. And when we do breathing, it's not to get rid of anxiety, it's to help us through a tough situation. So if you can practice this daily, even 5 minutes, maybe 10, you'll start to get into a rhythm of it, and it really helps. It really helps you focus and return back to what you need to focus on. So everybody sit comfortably in a chair, place your feet on the floor. If you want to, you can lie down, turn your camera off and lie down on the floor. Fold your hands on your belly. And I want you to breathe in slowly and calmly. Breathe in, fill up the belly with a normal breath. Try not to breathe in too heavily. The hands should move up when you breathe in, as if you're filling up a balloon. And watch your shoulders. Try to avoid lifting your shoulders as you inhale. Rather, breathe into the stomach. Breathe out slowly as you count to 5. So breathe in, feel your hands expand and your belly fill, and then breathe out for 5 and feel your hands come back together as your belly empties out. And work to continue to slow down that pace of your breathing. And that's it. That's diaphragmatic breathing. So hands on your belly, deep breath in. Feel your belly fill up, and then count for 5 as you exhale. And that's it. And again, you just try to work to slow down the pace of your breath. But that on its own, taking 3 of those deep breaths, not doing 5 or 10 minutes or whatever, just taking 3 slow diaphragmatic breaths can significantly help with stress and recentering and what you should focus on. So that's how you breathe. Now we're going to take, let's see how much time. Okay. It's 10 minutes. Is that okay, Donna? So we're going to take 10 minutes. I could probably end it after 8. We'll see. I'm going to play a free mindfulness meditation for us to perform. And there's also a ton of apps. So go ahead and get yourself comfortable. Nope.
Why doesn't every home in the U.S. have solar panels? The reason is not about sunlight or weather or even politics. It's actually just because most people don't know about the new Biden policy that allows
I apologize.
to install the
I had it all queued up and I forgot to.
That just plays into your environmental and feeling part of taking care of the earth. So that's all right.
It does, doesn't it? So I'm just going to take this. I did copy the website just in case this happened. And there we go. It's just going to take me a second. Oh, I had it so nice too.
That's all right.
There we go. All right. I'm going to share my screen here now. It's going. You can hear it.
Welcome to the Daily Calm. Let's start today's session by finding a comfortable position with a tall, straight back. Allow your arms to rest gently When you're ready, close your eyes. Bring full attention to this very moment, settling in and allowing the mind and body to still. And with openness, patience, and curiosity, bring your awareness to the breath. Taking a deep breath in and releasing it fully. Follow the breath as it flows in and out of your body. And taking one last deep breath before letting the breath settle. Allowing it to feel natural and easy. Don't try to force the breath or regulate it in any way. Just allow it to flow naturally on its own.
Is she not talking?
And we'll scan down the body, concentrating our attention from part to part. Start by bringing your attention to the top of your head and scalp, feeling whatever's happening in this area. You might feel tingling or heat, throbbing or soft vibrations. There may be strong sensation, or you might not feel much at all. Now lower your attention to your forehead, face, and jaw. Allow the muscles here to relax. On your next out breath, let that sensation dissolve. Lower your focus to the neck, letting the throat and sides and back of the neck soften. Notice any sensation that arises on the surface of the skin or deeper within. Now bring your attention to your shoulders, noticing if there's any tension or strain. Breathe into your shoulders, and if any parts feel tight, allow them to relax.
Now I'm going to let you slowly return back. And there's more to it, but I'll have the link for you. And we're kind of a little bit out of time. So that's just an example of what a meditation, meaningfulness meditation can do. And you can see it does take time. It does require you to sit back, but really not a ton of time. So it's excellent practice, and it can take you out of, there we go. It can take you out of your world for the moment. And there's actually some that you pick a place and you go to and you visit, and it just gives you that break that you need. So I just wanted to, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope some of the information that I passed along to you helps with your journey. And I know taking time for yourself can bring feelings of guilt, feelings of stress, because it's hard to find time. But just remember, I think what can help with those feelings of stress is if you don't take the time to care for yourself, who's going to be able to take care of the person you're caring for? So think of it that way, that you're taking care of yourself to help them. And with that said, here's my contact information. If anyone's interested or has any questions after the conference, please feel free to email or call. And I'd be happy to help as best I can. So may you be happy, well, safe, feel peaceful and at ease, and know that there's many people, many places that are working to try to support you. And there are resources, and if you need help getting connected, then the IOG, the Area Agencies on Aging, the Alzheimer's Association, there's so many places that can help you get into those contacts. So thank you so much for having me, and please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Roseanne. That was wonderful. It's things that I was talking to my coworker Cheryl, and we have been emphasizing these important things about the sleep, the exercise, the nutrition. You can't nail that enough, that is for sure. There were a couple questions early on. One of them was, do home care services provide training on ADLs in care?
They can, and it depends on what home services they are. So I'm an occupational therapist, so that's our main area is ADL. So I know occupational therapy definitely does. PT does to some extent, but even aides that come in to help with the home should be trained. That would be a good question to ask the agency that they're working with, is if the people that are coming to their home were specifically trained on activities of daily living, because there's so many factors to consider with dementia, and so many ways that you can avoid arguments and refusals and anxieties just by the way you react to them and the way you set up the environment. So
I always feel that way too. If they can get a skilled person out there, a nurse or a social worker, to do the initial and get your concerns out there, I think is always helpful in the home care setting. Another question was, what are your thoughts on melatonin supported sleep? Because you really emphasize the 7 to 9 hours worth of sleep. And as a caregiver, the interruptions that you have within your sleep cycles are numerous. So what's your thought on that?
Right. So I can't provide any recommendations on that. That would be more of a doctor, a physician. I would ask your physician about that. But I know a lot of people try different things. Some people try CBD oil. Some people try all natural melatonin supplements. We always stick with just trying to work on the environment and doing that, but definitely a great discussion to have with a physician.
Perfect. And one other question was, can you just briefly go over the effects of lack of sleep on the body? You talked about the T cells and that kind of thing. Somebody had a question on that.
Oh, sure. So it's what happens is your body, because it doesn't have the rest. I guess a good way to think about it would be, think of a newborn baby, and how they need so much sleep. And why do they need that sleep? Because their body develops. So, so what happens is when they don't have enough sleep, what happens physiologically in your body affects your brain function and your ability to maintain cells. So after a certain age, we start losing brain cells. We just do. And in a way to help promote that is sleep. So, and those are produced during sleep. So, what they are, I'll try to give my best description here. They're white blood cells, and they have a huge impact on our immune response. So when we get ill, when we get a cold, what happens is those T cells respond to infection and they help fight them. So, so when you don't have enough sleep, you don't produce enough of those T cells to then fight for you when you get a little virus or a big virus, for that matter. I hope that helps.
Well, with that, I want to say thank you, Roseanne. It was a wonderful opportunity. As always, you will receive a copy of this slides, and this is being recorded, so everybody will have access if they need to go back and reassure themselves on what they heard. So thank you so much, Roseanne. And our next speaker up is Dr. Amanda Leggett, and she is going to kind of get her slides going, and we'll keep going with the program. I'll introduce you once you get your slides up, Amanda. So now you're going to find out a little bit about your caregiving style. So Amanda Leggett is actually new to the Institute of Gerontology. She just started with us in August, so we are excited to have her aboard. She is assistant professor for the Institute of Gerontology and the Department of Psychology at Wayne State. She received her MS and PhD in Human Development and Family Studies from Pennsylvania State University. Her research program focuses on the dementia caregiver stress process and mental health in later life. She recently received funding to develop a taxonomy of dementia care management styles aimed to help determine how classifying one's caregiving style might be used to do targeted interventions and optimize care. Her new funding just received from the NIA will characterize dementia caregiver networks and their associations with outcomes for persons living with dementia. She serves on the editorial board for Journals in Innovation in Aging and Research and is a 7-year hospice volunteer. So I'd love everyone to give a warm welcome to our next speaker, Amanda Leggett.
Thank you so much, Donna. Can everyone hear me okay?
You're good.
Okay, perfect. Wonderful. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, Donna. My name's Amanda Leggett. I am just honored and happy to be here with you on this Saturday morning. And if you're a football fan like me, thanks for tailgating with me in this conference. I know there's lots of big games today. So I will be sharing about what Donna was describing in that introduction on what I call caregiving style. And I hope that by the end of this talk today, you'll know exactly what that is and understand what I mean and how I think about that in terms of my research, because I think it has a lot of importance in terms of how you provide your care, but also how it impacts your well-being and the well-being of the individual for whom you're providing care. So I do want to start with some acknowledgements just in gratitude for the funding I received to do this work from the National Institute on Aging, a really wonderful team of mentors and collaborators in this research all around the United States. And I've been fortunate to have a really wonderful team working with me of research assistants, many of whom, in fact, the majority of whom were undergraduate students at the University of Michigan, where I was before I joined Wayne State. So I really value the ability to include undergraduates in this work, many of whom really are thinking about coming out of adolescence and being in this early adulthood period and not necessarily thinking about adulthood and aging, and just giving them this exposure to dementia and dementia care, I think is really powerful. Many of them go into medical careers, and having students interested in aging, interested in dementia and dementia care is so, so important. So much gratitude to them. So I want to start today with a little bit of a case study and get you all thinking about maybe how you might see yourself responding to this case, which will give us a really nice intro into the presentation today. So our case study is Frank, who is an 86-year-old man living with dementia. And in this scenario, he insists that his grandson, Kevin, is stealing from him and gets combative when Kevin comes to visit. He throws a pillow across the room at Kevin. So I'm going to read some possible responses to this scenario, and I'd like you to think about if this scenario were to happen to you and your caregiving situation or something similar, which best reflects the way you might respond to this situation. So first, scenario A, you go and pick up the pillow and take it back to Frank. You've taken all of Frank's care on your shoulders and seem to take care of things without getting too emotionally involved. You tell Frank that Kevin didn't steal anything from him and start a separate conversation with Kevin. Or maybe you're more like scenario B. You remember this happening last month and that trying to reason with Frank didn't work. So instead, you try to dissipate the situation by telling Frank that you and Kevin are going to the kitchen to make a snack and use the snack as a diversion for Frank. In the kitchen, you suggest to Kevin that it might be better to prevent this from happening in the future by visiting Kevin at his house rather than him coming to you. You're not worried and know you'll be able to figure out a solution if this strategy doesn't work. Maybe you're more like C. You are frustrated when Frank again accuses Kevin. Kevin is a wonderful grandson, and you just don't understand why Frank keeps reacting this way. You tell Frank that Kevin would never steal from him and that he needs to stop lying and go pick up the pillow. You feel your blood pressure going up and are not sure how much more of this behavior you can take. Scenario D. You exclaim, "What? What did he steal from you?" and immediately feel guilty for your reaction as you realize the dementia is impacting his beliefs. But when Frank can't give you a response for what was stolen, you feel helpless and don't know what to do. You try to trial and error some solutions, but keep getting stuck and wish you had some support for how to handle the situation. And finally, maybe you resonate with this scenario E. You go to comfort Frank and rub his back to help him calm down. You think about how stressed you would be if you thought someone was stealing from you and try your best to empathize with Frank. You tell him that you remember seeing the stolen item and suggest that you look for it together, including Kevin in the search. So each of these scenarios describes a potential response that someone might have to this challenging situation that might align with what we call caregiving style. But before I get into describing exactly what that is, what that means, and what these styles look like, I wanted to just give a very brief background on how we in research tend to think about caregiving stress. And for many years, for decades, in fact, and often still today, people held a pretty simplistic view of caregiving stress or caregiving outcomes. The idea was essentially that the more symptoms or more problematic behaviors that a caregiver had to deal with in their caregiving situation and with an individual living with dementia, then the worse the outcomes. So the idea was that if someone was maybe at a later stage of dementia or exhibiting more behavioral problems, then it followed that the caregiver would be more stressed because they had more to deal with in their caregiving situation. But in fact, Back in the early 1880s, my mentor, Dr. Zaret, and his colleagues really questioned this assumption and showed that while there is an association between the symptoms of the disease that someone is caring for and caregiving outcomes, that association is really very modest or quite small, smaller than was anticipated, certainly at the time. And so in the 1990s, a researcher named Leonard Perlin and his colleagues developed a broader model that got into a variety of factors that were believed to impact caregiver outcomes. So you can see that original bubble I showed on the prior slide there on the left, objective stressors in light blue. That was the same bubble that I was talking about before, but he builds out this model and suggests that caregivers look at these stressors in different ways. They appraise them differently. So if you think about a symptom that can sometimes come with dementia, maybe incontinence, for one caregiver, this is highly stressful to see maybe their spouse or partner develop incontinence. And this can just be very, very concerning for some individuals. Whereas for others, it's, you go to the store, you get the Depends, maybe you add the plastic sheets to the bed. You have a variety of ways of handling this stressor that makes it not such of a big deal. So the way that caregivers interpret these stressors can vary quite a lot. And also, we know that these stressors can proliferate into other areas of caregivers' lives. So maybe these things that you're dealing with impact the way you're handling your job, and there's some work conflict there. Or maybe it creates conflict in that broader family network with maybe one adult child sibling feeling we should handle it one way, and another adult child sibling feeling strongly about handling a situation in a different way. And then each caregiver has their own set of resources that they bring to the table when providing care. So we cope in different ways. Maybe our social support networks are set up differently. So generally speaking, this model just expands out quite a bit and suggests that it's not just the different stressors that a caregiver is dealing with, but we have to consider the broader context and how caregivers are interpreting these stressors. What I feel has really been understudied, though, in the past several decades, where research in caregiving has really taken off, is the actual process of how are families providing care? What does that look like? What are they doing? And how are they thinking about it? And so that's where my concept of caregiving styles comes in. And I always like to preface this by starting out describing some research on parenting. So actually back in the 1970s, a while back now, there was some really seminal work that was done by a psychologist on what was called parenting styles. So, not everyone's been a caregiver, but everyone has either had a parent or been a parent. So this is something that everyone can relate to. And the idea with parenting styles was that parents approach care for children differently. There's different levels of responsiveness, discipline, warmth, love that parents show to their children. This can be grouped into different profiles. And over time, this research has shown that these different parenting style profiles relate to child outcomes. So certain profiles are associated with better child outcomes, both in terms of school performance and socio-emotional well-being. And then certain parenting styles are associated with worse outcomes when it comes to children. And so in my work, I'm doing something very similar here, but trying to understand this from a family caregiver for an individual living with dementia. So here, PWD, that acronym stands for person living with dementia. So how are family caregivers approaching care for an individual with dementia? And can we group these into distinct profiles that maybe relate to outcomes for caregivers and the individual with dementia that they're providing care for? So the ultimate goal of my work in this area is to better be able to identify caregivers that may be at risk for negative outcomes or at risk for maybe maladaptive care provision to an individual with dementia, and be able to use that understanding to take a more personalized medicine approach. Too long, I feel interventions have taken a really one-size-fits-all approach to caregiving. Kind of any caregiver should come into the intervention, and we've seen that not all interventions work for every individual because of course, we're all different. And so if we can get a better understanding of how caregivers are coping, how they're handling care in the day-to-day, and think about some distinct profiles, maybe we can use those to better tailor our approaches to working with family caregivers. So just a very brief background on kind of what we did in this research to come to our better understanding of these profiles. So this came from a grant I received for early career or early stage investigators, junior faculty from the National Institute on Aging. And in this study, we interviewed 100 family caregivers for an individual with a diagnosis of dementia. These caregivers lived within 60 miles of Ann Arbor because our team drove to the caregiver and did these interviews in person. We also collected saliva samples. And so that was another reason we wanted to go to the caregiver so that we could collect those saliva samples. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So these were unpaid family or friend caregivers who had primary responsibility of care. And the individual with dementia was not in a nursing home or assisted living facility. They were living independently in the community, and they were not at the terminal phase of disease. So they weren't on hospice. They had at least 6 months of life expectancy. So the caregiver was still very actively providing care. These interviews were done back in 2018, pre-COVID. That's how we were able to go to participants' homes and meet them locally. So we either met them at their home if they preferred that, or if they preferred, we would meet at a local place like a coffee shop or a McDonald's, something like that. And so just to give you a little bit of an overview of the sample that we worked with in this study, we had a very wide age range. You can see our caregivers ranged in age from 20 years old to 90 years old. So we did have some grandchildren in our study who were the primary caregiver for their grandparent with dementia. And then we had a spouse there, 90 years old themselves, providing care. But you can see the average age was about 63. The majority of our caregivers were female. One thing this study did lack, and we realized kind of a little bit late in the game that we weren't getting as much racial and ethnic diversity as we would have preferred. That's something we'll continue to work on in future studies, as our sample was predominantly white. And as we were recruiting in Ann Arbor and surrounding areas, a big college town, we did have a very highly educated sample. On average, our caregivers had been providing care for 55 months. I think that's about 4.5 years, and providing more than a full-time weekly job in terms of hours of care. On average, our caregivers were providing about 54 hours of hands-on care a week. You can see that the majority of our caregivers were spouses, but we had about 1/3 of our caregivers were adult children. The majority were living together. And you can see about half of our sample had Alzheimer's disease, but the other half had another diagnosis. You can see a pretty good proportion had either Lewy body or Parkinson's dementia. Okay, so I'm going to get into sharing with you now about one small piece of the pie of this broader area of research that we're doing, but how we use some in-depth open-ended interviews with caregivers to really start to define these distinct caregiving styles. And so we did a qualitative or textual interview alongside some quantitative scales, but today I'm going to focus just on this open-ended piece where myself and my research team interviewed the family caregivers, asking them, can you tell me about a care-related challenge you've had recently? So kind of tell me something that's been difficult, right, in your care recently. And why was this difficult? Why was this challenging for you? And literally, we had the caregivers kind of walk us through the full story of this challenge or this difficulty in their caregiving. So what happened? How did you react? What were you thinking? What did you say? What did you do? How did you respond to the individual with dementia in that scenario? And we also asked the caregivers to tell us more about their values, their beliefs that they hold that play into caregiving decisions that they're making. And I'd be happy to answer more questions about our methodology at the end if that's of interest to anyone. But as I want to spend the majority of the time talking about what we found, I'll just briefly say that we used this technique called the rigorous and accelerated data reduction technique, which was developed by Daphne Watkins, a researcher in the School of Social Work at the University of Michigan. And what that process entails, kind of in a nutshell, is taking these transcribed interviews with our caregivers and going through as a team and kind of taking phrases or words that we would ascribe to certain areas of the text that provide meaning to what we're seeing there. And then we start to look for themes in the words and the phrases that we're pulling out that kind of cut across the 100 different interviews that we did. And ultimately, we were able to group caregivers along those themes where we were seeing common words, common phrases that cut across these interview transcripts that really aligned certain caregivers together in terms of commonality and the sort of things that they were talking about across these interviews. Also, to give you a little bit of background, as we were asking caregivers to tell us what were they finding challenging, what were they finding difficult, and how are they responding, here's what our caregivers were telling us. So we grouped these care challenges in two different columns here. The first column we call primary. So that was like the initial main challenge that a caregiver was sharing with us about, where they talked specifically about how they responded to that challenge. But what we found is in talking about one challenge, caregivers were often talking about a plethora of challenges. So we would code any additional challenges that they described as secondary, but the ones that were primary was initially what they were focusing in on with us, that they gave us a specific response for how they were handling that challenge. And so what I want to point out from this table that I find personally most interesting is when we think about dementia, people often describe it as a cognitive disease, right? That goes along with memory impairment. And of course, that's true, but you can see here that only 18% of our caregivers that we interviewed identified some facet of cognitive decline as the primary challenge that they were dealing with. You can see a whole variety of other challenges that came up here. Predominantly, many of our caregivers were describing the acronym BPSD, stands for behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. So these were very common. In fact, 1 out of every 4 of our caregivers mentioned agitation specifically as a big challenge for them. And then our activities of daily living, our instrumental activities of daily living, these are these more functional care tasks. Then other caregivers talked about medical care issues like a fall that occurred or having to help their friend or relative with the struggle that they were experiencing in declining and losing some of their autonomy. And one of our caregivers refused to identify any challenge. So that was really great for that one caregiver, but everybody else could identify at least something that they were struggling with. All right, now I'm going to get into the good stuff. And these are our 5 caregiving styles that we identified through this work. This work has now been published in the journal Dementia. So other researchers are learning about it. And I'm going to take you through these different styles one by one and share with you kind of some of their defining characteristics and also kind of a quote I'll share with you that you can hopefully see where we were getting some of these characteristics from. So our first group we call the externalizer. It took us quite a while to come up with these names, but we call this group the externalizer. Kind of a characteristic quote of this group might be, I'll say, if you think you're punishing me, you're only punishing yourself. What we saw with externalizers was a very superficial understanding of dementia. And what I mean by that is they would say in words that they knew that their relative or their friend had dementia, but their view or their understanding was that the symptoms the individual with dementia was experiencing were kind of volitional or intended towards the caregiver. So they were doing so they viewed the individual with dementia as doing something specifically to agitate or get a rise in the caregiver, for example. And I'll give you an example of this on the next slide. Our externalizers tended to take a very rigid or inflexible approach to care. So they kind of had one way of going about things and didn't necessarily see other approaches that they might take. They tended to view the caregiving challenges that we just described as stressful for themselves, rather than thinking about or processing with us specifically any stress that challenge had on the individual with dementia, the care recipient. Behaviorally, we saw a lot of responses of helplessness, frustration. These caregivers commonly responded with anger or blaming. And one thing that was really interesting that came up for us in these interviews was this tendency towards trying to bring the individual with dementia back into the current reality of the caregiver. So we know oftentimes with dementia, one of the symptoms that can come might be delusions or hallucinations, where an individual with dementia is in another reality, right? They're seeing or hearing or experiencing things that aren't actually happening. And so rather than going along with that, these caregivers are trying to contradict and bring the individual with dementia back into the current reality, or the reality of the caregiver. And so again, as I start to describe these styles, you can think back to that case scenario and see if one of these styles most resonates with you at this current moment, or maybe resonates with another family member who's assisting you with care. You can kind of think where you might align with these styles. So here's an example of a quote from one of our caregivers who fell into this externalizer style. This caregiver said, "Sometimes if I say, no, that didn't happen, everybody's told me don't argue," right? So everyone in this caregiver circle is telling them don't argue with the individual, but this caregiver just doesn't like letting it go. So we'll get home and the caregiver says, "I don't know if she tries to lie about it or what. She'll act like that never even happened." So this was actually a caregiver I remember well, who was describing a situation where he had been out to eat with his wife at a restaurant, and his wife with dementia was telling fabricated stories to the waitress. And this man was very embarrassed and, contradicting, saying, "No, this never happened," trying to tell the waitress, like, this isn't true, this story. And so that's what he's describing here. But you can see he's viewing it as a lie and not as a symptom of the dementia. All right. Our next group we call the individualists. And I also forgot to mention up in parentheses there, you can see the number of caregivers out of our 100 that fell into these particular style profiles. And the individualists, their characteristic quote is, "You just live through it, you just do it." So kind of like the Nike slogan, "Just do it." In fact, we were calling this group "Just Do It" for a long time because that particular phrase kept coming up in these interviews. It was very interesting. And so they would say, "You live through it, you just do it." So somewhat similar to an externalizer, individualists took a very direct or linear approach to care. So again, this is the way I'm doing things, I'm doing it my way, and I'm not really thinking about other ways that I might enact care. And in their transcripts and their discussions with us, they were more emotionally removed. So with our externalizers, we were seeing expressions of anger, helplessness, frustration. That wasn't coming up as much with our individualists. They weren't really talking about any emotions that they were experiencing. They were just talking about what they did, how they did it, kind of point A to point B. Behaviorally, what we saw most commonly with this group was doing strategies to just avoid or prevent a negative situation or a caregiving challenge from occurring again in the future. So what they were focusing on is, okay, if something happened that didn't go well, what can I do to keep that from happening again in the future? Was a really big focus for this group. And even though they didn't necessarily have a huge toolkit of different approaches that they were using in care, like you'll see with some of our other styles, they were managing care very well without having many challenges. So it seemed to us from our interviews with these individuals that they hadn't quite like hit that wall yet in terms of caregiving. They hadn't necessarily faced a challenge that they couldn't handle individually or handle themselves. So here's a characteristic quote of this type of style. This caregiver says, "Go there and do it. Remember when I told you it's part of my responsibility, it's just what you have to do." And so here the interviewer is trying to probe, get more detail and asking, have you figured out any strategies that have made it easier for you over time? Have you ever changed your approach? And this caregiver says, no, you just go there and do it. So a little bit of a lone wolf, if you will, in their approach, kind of taking everything on their own shoulders in care. All right, next we have our group that we call the learner. This was the biggest style of all of our groups. And you can see their characteristic quote here, as you go along, you stumble on a few things, but stumble it is. So you can see just from that quote that these caregivers were experiencing a lot of challenges, and rather than having adaptive strategies to manage them, they're kind of stumbling along. And one of the ways that played out behaviorally we saw this group using a lot of trial and error to try and figure out how to manage caregiving challenges and caregiving situations, which is definitely a very important first stage in this process. Is try this, see if it works. If it doesn't, okay, regroup and try something else. What was challenging for these caregivers is that they were finding that their trialing and erroring wasn't really working for them. So they're really trying to address their caregiving challenges and trying to learn as they go, but often they were getting stuck. So if you remember, the individualists, they were seeming to manage quite well without running into many challenges. The learner was running into challenges, and they were using a variety of care management strategies, kind of on a spectrum, from strategies that we might consider a little more maladaptive to strategies we might consider to be more adaptive. What really distinguishes them from the prior two styles that I described is that they recognize the light bulb had gone off, that their approaches were not working for them. They were ready to make a change, but just really facing challenges in what change they needed to make. They needed help. And we saw a huge array of emotions in this group. So in contrast with the individualist who wasn't really showing many emotions in our interviews, and the externalizer, which tended to show more negative emotions, the learner spanned the emotional gamut. So similar to the externalizer, they expressed some helplessness, some guilt. They tried to temper their emotions some of the time. They felt empathy for the individual they were providing care for. So the whole gamut we saw here. And so here's a characteristic quote again for this style. You can see this caregiver saying, "I just have to tell her there's something wrong. Look at your feet." So here's a situation where the individual with dementia had put the shoes on the wrong foot. And so the caregiver is saying, "There's something wrong. Look at your feet." But then they take a deep breath and they recognize, you know what, she's not doing this on purpose. This is maybe not the right way to handle this situation. So you see this growing awareness that was missing from the prior two styles. So you can see they start out by, trying to correct the individual with dementia, but then recognizing, you know what, she doesn't realize they're on the wrong feet. So let me take a step back and reevaluate how to correct this. All right, our next style we call the adapter, and their characteristic quote here is always expect the unexpected. And what really stands out about this group is that they had a big tool chest of a variety of different strategies that they used when they faced caregiving challenges. So somewhat similar to the individualist, their interviews with us were not bringing up a lot of emotions that they were experiencing in handling these care challenges. Their interviews were entirely focusing on, here was the challenge, but here's the different ways that I know how to handle this challenge when I experience it. when I experience it. So they had more of an emotional homeostasis, if you will. They seem to be pretty level in their emotions, and they're really focused on a variety of ways that they can adaptively manage their caregiving challenges. And what came up again and again in this group was that they learned over time how to better address these caregiving challenges. So maybe, if you will, they might have been a learner in the past. We do believe that these people can change styles over time. Maybe they once were a learner, but over time they figured out how to more adaptively handle caregiving challenges. And in fact, they used a variety of strategies. Some of them we might consider more maladaptive, some of them more adaptive. But what set them apart was whatever they were doing was actively addressing the caregiving challenge. So they weren't getting stuck like the learner. Their approaches were working for them in their caregiving. And so I really enjoy this quote. And this is actually from one of our grandchild caregivers caring for a grandmother, who every day the grandmother would, wake up and think it was her day to go to the hair salon and get her hair done. And so the granddaughter here is saying, how she handled it. And a lot of it is, hiding her care stuff, maybe hiding her bobby pins so that the grandmother isn't seeing that and then assuming, oh, it's the day to go to the salon. Or they would say, oh, it's not today, but it's in a couple of days. You're right, it's coming up really soon. Or sometimes they would pretend to do her hair. So they'd get out the blow dryer, they'd get out the brush and give the grandmother some of that salon experience. And so she felt satisfied, feeling like she'd had that done. So you can see that they had a variety of approaches to manage this challenge when it came up. All right, and then our final caregiving style here, we call the nurture. And their characteristic quote is, "I value making the most of what is present rather than what is lost." And you'll see maybe the most contrast between the nurturer and then the first style I talked about, the externalizer. So whereas the externalizer was really focused more on these stressful scenarios and how it was stressful for the caregiver in the nurturer style didn't really talk about how these scenarios were stressful for them, but talked about how they could see how stressful the scenario was on the care recipient with dementia and how they're trying to reduce the stress for that individual. They approach care with a lot of positive affect. So they viewed the caregiving situation very positively. They will be able to manage it. They know they can do it. They had a lot of what we might call mastery or self-efficacy. They viewed care as something that they could do and that they could manage in a very positive way. And this seemed to come more naturally to the nurture than it did to other styles. And there were several, for example, in the nurture in our study, there were several nurses or individuals who worked in the healthcare field, right? So this is something that's core to that individual's being, is being a caregiver professionally. And then they brought that same skill set kind of naturally in to their caregiving role for their family member or their friend. Again, kind of in contrast with the externalizer, who was trying to kind of, with the fishing line, if you will, reel the individual with dementia back into the caregiver's reality, the actual reality. What we saw nurturers doing, and I'll give you an example of this in just a minute, we saw the nurturers kind of diving right into the lived experience of the individual with dementia, or joining them in this altered reality. Some of the behavioral strategies that stood out the most or were most commonly used in this group were strategies of comfort, physical affection, and teamwork. They talked a lot about how they would do things together as a team with the individual with dementia. So actually, before I give that quote, I'll provide two examples I really like from this group. One of our husband-wife pairs, the husband was the caregiver, the wife was the individual with dementia. One of the challenges he described was her not wanting to brush her teeth and kind of resisting brushing her teeth. And so he made it into a game that they would do together, where he would play music and they would brush their teeth together while the music was playing. And when the music stopped, they could stop brushing their teeth. So he did it in such a way where he wasn't just telling her to do it, he was joining alongside her, and they would brush their teeth together. An example I really like of entering the lived experience of the individual with dementia. This was a wife caregiver caring for a husband who was having hallucinations, visual hallucinations. Her husband was seeing men in black suits and black hats coming into their home, and it was very concerning for him. And so rather than the caregiver saying to the husband, like, what are you talking about? I don't see any men. There are no men in our home. She would yell at the men. She would say, you've got to get out of here. You're bothering my husband. She would open the door and like try to shoo these men out of the house, right? So the men were not there. This was a hallucination. There were no men. But rather than kind of contradicting her husband's experience, she joined in with him to comfort him in the way of, you've got to get out to these men, which was really kind of a creative way of handling that. But here's a great quote for the nurturer. You can see this value perspective on the stress for the individual with dementia. So I value her. I'm trying to make her life still be useful and fulfilling. I think she wants. So this caregiver is really emphasizing the way that they manage caregiving challenges by focusing on kind of what's still left, again, as in that prior quote, rather than what was lost. So those are our 5 styles. I'm now going to share with you a bit about some of the associations we're seeing in our research between these styles and some of the outcomes that we're looking at. And then I'm going to wrap up today with some strategies that I think might be useful interventions or things to think about for caregivers that fall into these distinct styles. So first, again, we had a small sample, 100 caregivers, but 100% of our externalizers were actually Caucasian American. The externalizers were significantly older than other groups. There was more spousal caregivers in this group. And they were caregiving for the most challenging patients. They were caregiving for individuals with dementia who had significantly more behavioral and psychological symptoms than caregivers in the other style groups did. And then in terms of outcomes, again, if you recall, one of the things that we collected was saliva samples. And why we did that was to be able to assess some physiological measures of stress. And one physiological measure of stress is the hormone cortisol. And a more elevated cortisol output is indicative of greater levels of physiological stress. This has been documented quite a lot in a variety of research scenarios. And we found that our externalizer group had significantly greater cortisol output than our nurture group in particular, that last style that I just talked about. So not only were we hearing greater stress reports from these caregivers, we were also seeing this physiologically taking its toll in this group. This group, the externalizers, reported the greatest caregiver burden. They said they had the most distress in responding to behavioral and psychological symptoms. And this group also said that the individuals with dementia had the lowest level of quality of life. All right, our individualist group, 1 in 3 of our individualists reported difficulty in paying for their living expenses. And I found this very interesting because if you remember back to the individualists, is this very straightforward, just do it, just take care of it approach. And that may be the most adaptive approach for someone who has other challenges in their daily living beyond caregiving, right? If you have difficulties in just maintaining your living expenses, then that's going to be a priority for you, maybe over and above sometimes the caregiving challenges. And so just this independent, I take care of it, I do it, may be the most adaptive approach in those situations. We also see that this group had been providing care for the least amount of time on average. And so again, if you recall, they hadn't gotten stuck yet, the individualist group. They hadn't encountered challenges that they weren't able to meet. And it may be because they just hadn't gotten there yet in terms of the progression of the disease. In contrast, this group, rather than showing greater stress on these behavioral and psychological symptoms, this style actually showed the most amount of stress in managing these activities of daily living, these basic tasks, functional tasks of daily life. That was what they found the most stressful in their caregiving, and significantly more stressful than the other groups. But they actually reported the lowest levels of caregiver burden. So they weren't experiencing high levels of caregiving stress. And they actually had a similar average with the externalizers in terms of quality of life for the individual living with dementia. So they were on the same level with externalizers, and saying that the individuals within their care had lower levels of quality of life than reported by the other caregiving styles. Next, we have our learner group. The learner group had the highest proportion of female caregivers in it, 81%, 40%. So, I mean, if you think about it, nearly half of the learner caregivers were taking an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication, which is quite striking, and suggests that there were some challenges for these caregivers in their well-being, and they're dealing with a lot. And they actually had the individuals with dementia in their care had the lowest severity rating. So when we think about stages of disease with dementia, these individuals within their care were at earlier stages of disease. And they actually reported the least amount of behavioral and psychological symptom distress. So they, generally speaking, didn't have the worst stress outcomes, but also didn't have the best stress outcomes. So they're kind of somewhere in the middle in terms of how they're faring in their caregiving outcomes. Next, we have our adapter style. They provided care on average for about 7 years. I was kind of floored when I saw this, because if you recall, these caregivers had a huge toolkit, right? They were very adaptive in their care, but it maybe took them 7 years to get to that point. And so one of my goals and my team's goal in this area of research is, how can we get a caregiver who's not adaptive at this level and get them to that point without 7 years of caregiving elapsing? What can we do to help maybe a learner become an adapter in year 1, in year 2, rather than it taking 7 years? You can also see that these adapters had the highest levels of education in this group. 70% of the sample was using formal care services like an adult day or respite care, which is quite interesting too. Maybe that level of adaptability also related to their willingness in seeking formal caregiving sources as well. And this group actually had our highest proportion of non-white caregivers. So you can see that 31% of our adapter style were persons of color. So persons of color tended to have more adaptive caregiving style. And they had individuals with dementia that had the greatest dementia severity rating scale severity. So adapters were also caregiving for individuals at later stage of disease. And kind of similar to the learner, they were in the middle on all of the caregiving outcomes. So they never scored the worst on anything, but they also never were the best. And where we see better outcomes, generally speaking, was in this final group, the nurturer. Kind of a characteristic that was, yes.
One thing, can you, like, with your acronyms, say what they are? People are curious.
Oh,
it's like persons with dementia. We know it's PWD, but
I apologize.
No, that's all right. No worries.
Yes, thank you for interrupting me. Yeah, I will. And happy to come back to these slides at the end too. So in this final group of the nurturer, 60% of them were employed. So they were not full-time at-home caregivers. They were, a majority of this group were actually working outside of the home. And so you could think that that could give a form of respite for caregivers. It gives them a break from caregiving in a way that maybe they were able to have a more nurturing care style when they were home, because they weren't 24 hours a day at home providing care. And so again, in contrast with the externalizer group, the nurturer group had significantly lower cortisol output. So AUC is a technical term. It means area area under the curve. So you can think of an equation, and you could think of kind of a curve. The area under the curve is just indicative of the overall output of cortisol across a 24-hour period, across a day. And so physiologically, we saw that the nurturer style was showing less physiological stress relative to that externalizer style up front that was showing more physiological stress. And then these caregivers tended to report better outcomes. So they reported significantly lower distress than the other styles, both in relation to these behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, that's BPSD, and these activities of daily living are functional activities of daily life. So the nurturer style had less stress in managing these challenges. And they also had significantly higher reports of quality of life for the individuals of dementia, the persons with dementia in their care. So significantly better quality of life is what they were sharing with us. So given what I've shared so far of these style profiles and kind of how we're mapping them onto caregiving outcomes, really a next phase of this work that we're hoping to get into now is thinking about how we can modify our approaches, our services, our interventions, our treatments, the different ways that we work with caregivers based on an understanding of style. Again, as I shared up front, we have been following caregivers over time. We do see that caregivers change. And so just because you're one style doesn't mean you're that style forever. We do see that caregivers change between these different styles. So how can we help that process? How can we help take a caregiver that's experiencing more negative outcomes and maybe design an intervention or offer service recommendations that are going to be a better fit to meet that individual where they are, and helping them gain more adaptive responses to care and the like. And so I wanted to just briefly give you some of our thinking on that right now. But again, this is ongoing research. And one of the, not exactly disclaimers, but one of the points that I want to make really, really clear up front is our team is not looking at this as though there is a good style and a bad style. Definitely not. In fact, I think we see really strong strengths in each of these styles that we can capitalize in the way that we work with caregivers. We do see more negative outcomes associated with certain styles of care and more positive outcomes associated with certain styles of care. But it's not to say that one style is entirely bad and one style is entirely good. That's not the case at all. I think our goal is to just better understand the outcomes that are associated with these styles. And as I said, think about how we can individualize the way we work with caregivers and meet them where they are. So some of the things that are strengths of this externalizer group, the first style, they were, if you recall, handling the care of individuals with dementia, care recipients is the CR here, with the most behavioral and psychological symptoms. So they're caring for individuals who have really a lot of stressful symptoms. And they're trying so hard to meet the needs of these individuals. And we found they were really open with us. They could have, they could have not shared with us their frustration. They could have not shared with us their helplessness, but they were so open and sharing the challenges that they were facing and what they were experiencing, which was really powerful, that they were really good at expressing exactly what they were finding difficult. So some tips that we might offer, and where these ideas have come from at this point in our research is once we developed the style profiles, we took these to a variety of clinicians and practitioners in our geriatric clinics at the University of Michigan. Again, this was done when I was at University of Michigan before I came to Wayne State. And we talked with those clinicians and said, do you recognize these styles coming into your clinic? And if you saw an externalizer or if you saw a nurturer in your clinic, how might you give them different recommendations based on that? And so from these interviews, we kind of form some tips. And so one thing we would want to really emphasize for externalizers is you're not alone. Many caregivers are facing similar challenges and can support you. Allow yourself to receive support from others, right? Others who are going through similar challenging situations. And our clinicians told us that they find analogies work really well with externalizers. So in describing dementia, you can give all of the technical language all day long, but sometimes it's helpful to use an analogy like the pipes are corroding, right? So with this disease process inside the brain, the pipes are corroding. It's not functioning in the same way that it once was, to help understand that experience. We feel that respite or adult day services might be really beneficial for this group that's dealing with a lot of stress. Just taking a day out to have time for yourself, to take a break from the caregiving responsibility could be really powerful. And then having a plan in place for a crisis. So some advanced planning could really decrease some of the stress in the moment when a challenge does come up. So our hope would be to work with this group so when something stressful happens, we're not rushing to the emergency room if it's not medically necessary, right? That we can have a plan in place to adaptively address the challenge. For our individualists, some of the things they were really good at was that they were incredibly observant. Our clinicians tell us that individualists often come into the clinic with great records that they're keeping of the care recipient's symptoms and also their behaviors. Like, for example, they might have like a sleep schedule that they're keeping and an activity schedule and all of these things. They're very observant and they're usually very effective at getting things done. But what we want to emphasize for individualists is don't miss the overall humanity of the situation, right? Don't miss the forest for the trees. And remember that this is still a person. In many cases, this is like a beloved family member or friend. And it's not just tasks to be accomplished in the day. So how can you remember the overall humanity of that individual in the day as well? I think self-care can be really important for this group that often tends to put care entirely on their own shoulders. It's so important to draw on your network and to have them help you or, consider a formal care service that can allow you time to care for yourself. Because as we always say in caregiving, you can't pour from an empty cup. And an example might be pleasant activities is something that the caregiver and the individual with dementia can do together that can bring joy into the day beyond just the basic tasks of care. So maybe that's going for a walk together, working on a puzzle. For our learners, they were really growing in their understanding and their approaches to dementia. They're working really hard to adaptively manage care, and they were willing to accept help, which is very important. That's like the first step is a willingness to accept help from others. And so we're excited about this group as a research team because we feel this is a style that's going to really thrive in behavioral interventions that are often developed in research studies we care as an example of a behavioral intervention that's out there that caregivers can use to help kind of trial and error some different strategies to manage caregiving challenges. Support groups, right, where we get in a room with other caregivers and can problem solve together might be really powerful for learners who are seeking help from others and willing to take new ideas into their care. And trial and error is part of that learning process. So I think our learners often felt frustrated by the trial and error process, but we want to emphasize, that's okay. That's the first step is trial and erroring and seeing what works. And as you may remember, we saw a lot of mental health symptoms and medication use in this group. So we want to emphasize that sometimes when these symptoms kind of impair our daily functioning, it's really important to seek professional help, like speaking with a counselor. Our adapters, they understand dementia really well. Again, they have a huge toolkit that they bring to caregiving with adaptive strategies that they use. But we want to emphasize for them, it's really easy to get caught up in the tasks and the strategies and to miss the joy in care. Humor is something that many caregivers use so effectively. Like you just have to find the humor and the joy in some of these situations. And it's okay to express emotions and care. And we feel that this group might be particularly good at being in a support group or being in a peer support intervention where they can walk alongside another caregiver who is struggling. And finally, our nurture group, before I wrap up here and take some questions, what is really a strength of this nurture group is that they are able to focus on the abilities that still remain in the individual with dementia, those remaining capabilities, and also in the ways that they've grown in their own caregiving role. So some tips for them, kind of similar to some of our other caregiving styles. Self-care is so important. If you recall, this group was so focused on the individual with dementia and the stress that they were experiencing, but they must also remember to care for themselves, or they're going to have burnout at some point in time. And just like it might be helpful for the externalizer group, we feel respite care might be really important for this group too, to take some time out, to take some breaks, and to make sure that they're also caring for themselves. So with that, I will say thank you so much for your attention on a Saturday morning. I always am grateful to be able to share this work with others, and I have extreme gratitude for my mentors, my research team, my funding from the National Institute on Aging, and my research participants who take time out of their incredibly busy days providing care to improve research and to make a difference for other caregivers. It's so powerful. And with that, I will put a small little plug, is that the next step in this work is we are currently developing like a 20-item measure that can actually help to classify your caregiving style. So you could think about it like a quiz you might see in a magazine, where you can take 20 short questions, respond on a 1 to 5 scale, and that measure will help you understand your caregiving style at this particular moment, and could help a clinician or a community service agency think about what services and approaches might be most beneficial for you. That research is ongoing now. Very soon, we will be recruiting about 200 caregivers to participate in a survey online that will trial out a bunch of the items we've developed that we're testing for this measure. So if you're interested in this work, we would love for you to participate. And I will put my email in the chat. You could send me an email and I'll make sure to keep you posted as that study will be recruiting in the next month or two. So with that, I'll say thank you and look forward to taking questions.
Thank you, Amanda. I know in the chat, people are beginning to identify where they're at. They realize that their roles change and how they identify as the caregiver changes over time.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I was
thinking. And families, different family members may have different styles, right? And that can be very challenging too. So
yeah, exactly. Are there any direct questions for Amanda? Oops, someone's interested.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, great.
Well, if there aren't any, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the chat. I am going to take like a brief 3-4 minute little break after Amanda's talk, so that everyone can get up, stretch, take a bathroom break. I've captured you for 2 hours, and I think we all could use a couple minutes to be able to do that. I do, what was I going to ask? There was one question. She said, and I think you kind of answered it. It said, how do you think style is affected by how empty the caregiver bucket is? And I think you kind of talked about that. The caregiver bucket is a kind of a new term that they've been using the last couple years. So
yeah,
and that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's hugely affected by how empty the bucket is. And I think, you know, our goal as caregiving researchers and service workers, et cetera, would be to help you in your adaptive style before the bucket is empty. Like, we don't want it to get to that point, but often it does. And I think if it's empty, if you're operating, you know, as a party of one, it's incredibly challenging. And for sure, we're seeing that. In our work, where caregivers who are feeling depleted, it's directly related to how they approach and manage care, because you do the best you can, you know, with the resources you have at your disposal. And it's hard. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of growth. I never want to downplay that. So many of our caregivers are so resilient and gain so much personally from this role. But at the same time, it can be very depleting. And yeah, you approach care in the best way you can at the time. Our goal is to help make outcomes better for caregivers. And this research is kind of a first step in helping us to think about how we better individualize the way that we do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it just tells me that next year we need to make sure that we have just a session on different resources and like what area agency can help you with, what the Alzheimer's can help you with, and the different things to be able. And so we'll probably be able to put some of your resources in there as well. So,
oh, for sure.
I was a caregiver for 25 years of my life. And I think I went through every one of your different identities there. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people on here can identify with that as well.
Yeah. It's actually, as you said, you went through every one of the identities. It made me think of like the different stages of grief, right, that we can experience. And we know that sometimes there is a grieving process with dementia caregiving, right? And I'm sure that's aligned here as well of kind of where you are in that process of comprehending for yourself what you're experiencing. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. I really appreciate you coming forth, and welcome to the IOG team.
Thank you. I'm going to try and capture everyone's email from the chat.
No,
so thank you all for.
So we are going to take just a couple minutes. I'm going to bring our next speaker slides up and stuff, but everybody take time. We've got 2 or 3 minutes, and then we will meet back here. Thank you. just another minute or two. For some reason, my speaker went off. And I do not see him in the meeting, so I'm not really sure where he is. So I got to figure that out. He was in, but he is not here. So I'm just texting him. So go ahead and enjoy. One thing you could do is maybe drop where you identify as a caregiver today in the different styles that Amanda talked about. That could be interesting to see where everyone feels they are in today. Joel, if you're in the meeting, you're saying you're in the meeting, your name isn't popping up, but if you could go ahead and share your screen, that would be awesome. Maybe you're popping up under an alias, but I don't see you. You are here, good. Perfect. All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to do an introduction of Joel. I'm excited. Joel is part of the Henry Ford Health System. They are a new partner with us here at Wayne State University for our caregiver conference. So I'm pretty excited to have them there. He's going to talk about technology, kind of like how Roseanne talked about the new robots that they're using. Joel is going to talk about a virtual kit that's now being used. So Joel has been with Henry Ford Health Systems for 10 years. He is currently the group practice director for virtual primary care and the same day care, which is formerly known as walk-in clinics. As many of you know, virtual care and visits became extremely important during the pandemic, and it is exciting to see the direction in which it is headed. So please welcome Joel.
Good morning. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. And we have an exciting device to discuss with you guys today. So a little bit about the device before we get into it. It is a handheld device that the patient or family or caregiver would purchase, and then they would keep at home with them. So at Henry Ford, we do like to start with a patient story. So here I'm sharing a patient story of a mother of a 30-year-old autism patient. She purchased the TIDO device initially for her father that has Alzheimer's. Her son had a sore throat, ear redness, and congestion. So the mother decided to have an on-demand visit for her son. An on-demand visit is a 24/7 visit that we offer through Henry Ford as well. But she decided to use her virtual exam kit that she had just purchased. So during the video visit, the mother stated the patient became uncooperative through a temper tantrum. And once the patient was able to calm down and they were able to reconnect to the visit and complete the visit. The mother stated this is a life-changing technology for her and her son, as well as the clinic staff. She says during some of the visits that they've had in the past, he has become aggressive during his temper tantrums, and this gave them the ability to stay home and keep everybody safe, as well as convenient, not having to load him up in the vehicle and travel to the doctor's office. So he was able to stay in his comfortable place, and they were able to have a pretty comprehensive video exam using the device. So as we get into kind of what that device is and what it looks like and what it can do, as I mentioned before, it is a handheld device. It gives the provider the ability to listen to the patient's heart, lungs, examine their ears, examine the throat, all from the patient's home. There's also the ability to do a heart rate. There's the high definition cameras on the handheld device that you see here. They do allow the provider to do a review of any skin conditions, so rashes, sores, really any sort of skin condition, that the provider can view that from home as well. There's a built-in thermometer. There's also a pulse ox attachment. Unfortunately, that one's not included in the kit, and it is an additional purchase. But there's other devices that also connect in Bluetooth with it. There's a blood pressure cuff that you can purchase, and the provider can monitor the blood pressure from home. There's a scale, other devices as well. But the kit itself comes with what's shown here in the picture, which is that tongue depressor, the stethoscope, and the otoscope. Who can use the device? So one device can be used for the entire household. If you are a caregiver, you can use it with your family. You can use it with the people you're providing care for. Henry Ford Health is currently the only health system in Southeast Michigan that provides virtual care using the Tyto device. Henry Ford signed an exclusive contract with Tyto roughly 18 months ago, and we've been selling them to our patients ever since. As I mentioned previously, we do have the ability for the device to be used 24/7, 365 on our video visit on demand service. This means in the middle of the night, if you have a medical concern, you can now connect, have that visit, and have peace of mind without having to run to the emergency room or the urgent care the next morning. The other thing that we are starting to do as well is virtual wellness visits. So you can connect with your provider using the device, and they can get a lot of meaningful information. They can send in the lab work if you need it to be drawn later. And how does it work? So the device works through your MyChart. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with MyChart, but it's a way that you have all of your medical records, access to your medical records right through your smart device or computer. And through that, you're able to connect your device to your Henry Ford virtual exam kit to your MyChart. And then when you're logging in to do your video visit, it all connects through the Tyto platform. It's pretty easy, even though virtual care really took off during the COVID pandemic. We still have a few technical issues, but I think as we work through that, we're going to get more comfortable. Patients will get more comfortable doing it. And then the convenience of it as well. Winter in Michigan is never really a fun time to travel. So it's great if we have the ability to connect to a provider without having to load up in the vehicle and travel to the doctor's office for something that can be managed from home. So the other thing that I want to share with you guys today is a quick demo on what it looks like to actually have a visit with your provider. Many of the providers that have completed visits state that the visuals they get from the device are better than what they would get in the doctor's office. So the otoscope, they're getting a bigger, clearer picture. The stethoscope, the sounds they get from the heart and lungs are clearer, they state. So we can go ahead and jump into that demo. I do have someone from my team who is going to play the patient today. So Jenny, thank you very much for being the patient. So let me get into our patient file. So we're going to look at everything from the doctor's view today. So let's give me just a moment. And we'll get everything connected.
Maybe while he's getting it all connected, maybe some of you could write in the chat, are you Henry Ford Health System? Are you use them as your healthcare provider? That way we can kind of get an idea of if you've even heard of this device as of yet.
I'm wondering also if other health systems are likely to jump on that same bandwagon soon. And man, maybe Joel can talk about that a little later too.
All right.
Is it not working, Joel?
No, it's working. I'm
Okay.
sharing it. All right. Just had to... Jenny, can you mute? Please. All right, can everybody see the screen here?
Yes.
So this is what your provider would be seeing from their side. So Jenny is playing the part of our patient. Thank you again, Jenny. And over here, we have the device itself that's connected through Jenny's MyChart. So the provider is able to select what exam they want to do in here. So if I were to select lungs, it's going to prompt Jenny to connect her stethoscope to her device. And Jenny's going to go ahead and connect her stethoscope to her device.
Joel, I don't think it's working. I'm not seeing the screen changing to long.
Joel, you're sharing the encounter in Epic right now.
Are we supposed to see Jenny doing something as well?
Yeah, you have to show the provider end or the visit.
Let's do this. So.
Sorry, everyone. Technology is different every time.
All right. Can everybody see Jenny now?
Yes.
All right. So as I click on lungs here, sorry about that. It's going to prompt Jenny to connect that stethoscope to her device. And then once she has that connected, it gives the provider the different posts that they can select from. So if I ask Jenny to hold that on post 1, if we're really quiet, we may be able to hear some breath sounds, but generally the provider will use headphones for this. Go ahead and take a deep breath, Jenny.
Usually with headphones, you can listen to it a lot better.
So if we work through all these posts, the provider can actually hear the back as well. And this is where having that caregiver really will come in handy, because for anybody to be able to reach any of these posts on their back themselves would be very tough. But as you can see on the device on Jenny's side, it prompts her where the provider wants them to hold it as well. So it makes it very easy for anybody at home to be able to play this part. So the next exam we have is actually the heart. So if I click on the heart, it's going to pop up with some different posts here in the front where the provider can listen to heart sounds. And we can actually get a pretty good sound there. Can you guys hear that? No, just my side? Okay.
Is it because Jenny's muted for us?
I don't think so. I think it's because it's projecting to my side where the exam's coming from. And I'm not able to share that sound through this video connection into the Zoom meeting. So now, if I ask Jenny to remove the stethoscope, she's going to go ahead and connect her tongue depressor attachment. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that on for her. And on the back there, it's going to ask her to insert that. And as you can see, we get a really good picture of Jenny's throat there. So if there was something going on, the provider would have a nice view of what that is. The other really cool exam is the ear. So Jenny really loves me for making her walk through all this right now, but thank you again, Jenny. So it's going to prompt her to insert the otoscope, and there's also a cover that's going to go on top of that as well, so that way the otoscope itself stays clean. And she's going to twist that on, and then I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And once that's done switching between exams, it's going to go ahead and insert that into your ear, Jenny. Did you start the?
Select the ear exam again.
Is that not working? Let's go to the skin exam, Jenny. So we're going to go ahead and find a good spot on Jenny's arm where we can zoom into. And if there was a rash or if there was a sore of some sort, the provider's going to be able to get a really nice view here and be able to get the right prescription. Or if it's something that they're not able to manage and it's more of a dermatologic condition, we can write the referral to dermatology. We can get the provider in with dermatology. I'm sorry?
I just had to mute someone. You're good.
Okay. There's also a thermometer built into the device, which is nice, but we're not going to run through that. Everybody kind of knows what taking a temperature looks like. Let's see if we can get that ear exam going again, though, because this one is actually really cool.
Does it also have a blood pressure cuff?
There's a blood pressure that you can purchase separately that will Bluetooth in with it. The blood pressure does not come with the kit, though, unfortunately. But there is one available with it. Is that not working on your side, Jenny?
Yeah, I don't know why, because I inserted it.
Let's see. All right, go ahead and put it in position, and let's see if I can start it then.
Okay.
Yeah, for some reason the otoscope is being uncooperative today. But just like the throat exam, it gives the provider a nice large picture of the tympanic membrane, and they're able to determine whether there's an ear infection or what's going on with the ear during that exam if there's a problem. So some of the other things that we can do is a heart rate. We don't necessarily need to get into that, but it's basically holding that stethoscope in place and while it counts your heart rate. But yeah, unfortunately, for some reason, the otoscope does not want to work today. So I guess we can open this up for some questions. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, a little bit about what is the cost to your providers? What do they have to pay to have this service? Someone was asking, do the same instruments be used on all family members? And what do you think the benefit to caregivers is?
Okay, so first question, the cost to patients would be for the device would be $199 for the device. We also offer, once that device is paired to your MyChart, a $50 Amazon gift card. So effectively bringing that price down to $149 for the whole thing. As far as the tools and the kit go, yes, they can all be used on the family members. The tongue depressor, you get a bag of different tongue depressors, so you're not reusing that. But even with the tongue depressors, you can throw them in the dishwasher and reuse them. Same thing with the otoscope. It comes with a bag of covers for that, which are all reusable as well. You can wipe them down with alcohol, whatever you need to do to keep those clean. As far as the benefit to caregivers, there's several challenges, I think, with some caregiving groups, whether it's transportation, whether it's mobility. I mean, it could be crummy Michigan weather and hard to get somebody in the vehicle packed up and on the road to the provider's office. So what this device really allows you to do is have a more comprehensive virtual visit from home where the provider can actually get useful information for their medical decision making. Not to say that just a regular video isn't good, but it's more of just a conversation at that point where this device allows you to have an examination during your provider discussion. So it allows the patient to be comfortable in their own setting without having to remove them from that setting and take them to something where it might create some anxiety for that patient. So being able to have that medical exam from home for a caregiver would allow them to bring a little more peace into that patient's life.
Do you know, from your standpoint, are other healthcare systems looking at systems similar to that, like Ascension Health or Trinity Health?
So as of right now, the way that Tyto has done a lot of their marketing and sales is they've been partnering with health systems.
Mm-hmm.
So on the west side of the state, you have Spectrum Health, who has partnered with Tyto, and on the east side of the state, it's Henry Ford, who has partnered with Tyto. I think in the near future, there will be more health systems partnering with Tyto. It's just for Tyto's, I don't want to say new, but I think it's more of the virtual care opportunity that was seized during COVID. That's when patients really started to adopt virtual care because there was no other choice.
Right.
So that's when Tyto really came to the forefront as a good tool to use. But I think it's a matter of time before the other health systems are able to provide services using Tyto.
Someone is asking, is the Tyto machine able to be used at specialty providers in another state if they are using the system? Do you know?
So in order for you to use or you to have any sort of virtual visit with a provider, if you are outside of the state of Michigan connecting with a provider in the state of Michigan, that provider has to be licensed in the state where you reside. So what we've done here at Henry Ford is we have some of our providers that are credentialed in other states. So if your specialty provider was in Florida, for instance, and you're in Michigan, that provider would have to be licensed in the state of Michigan in order for you to conduct that visit.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions? I'm excited about this technology in the future so that it's part of everybody's health systems. Because as a caregiver, I could see this being very useful. I know when I used to have to take my dad to a million appointments just to have his heart rate checked or whatever it was, it's confusing for them. It's hard to do it. You're sitting in the waiting room for 3 hours waiting. So I can think as a caregiver, all of you would see benefit in these possibilities and with technology in the future. So I appreciate Joel coming forth with the Tyto technology, and hopefully we'll see it within all the systems as well. I'm glad that Henry Ford is on the forefront of it though, so that's exciting news. Is there any other questions regarding this new technology? I'm not seeing anything. All right. Well, thank you, Joel. I appreciate you coming forth with the word on Tyto, and as a healthcare provider through Henry Ford, I'm going to take a look at it myself. I can see that there's a benefit to it. How often do technology problems like what you had today though happen? Like with the ear not working? I mean, is that a normal occurrence, or what is it like percentage wise that things don't work?
To be honest with you, Jenny and I have done this demo probably 20 times. And that is the first time I've ever run into not being able to do the otoscope.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And I'm glad we could be the audience. That
Something had to go wrong. I mean, it's just one of those things. Something has to go wrong.
Well, that's all right. So yeah, I would have liked to seen inside the ear too. So hopefully we can do that in the future and see what it looks like. I couldn't believe how clear the picture was when you did the throat. It was very clear, and I could see how a doctor would be able to identify what was going on. So thanks, Joel.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I could have shown you guys the ear too, because the first time you see that, it's really amazing. But
it is. I can imagine.
It didn't work out.
Well, with that, I want to thank everybody for being here today. I know that you guys are all busy. It's a Saturday morning. We tried to reach as many people as we could because we know a lot of you are part of that sandwich generation where you're working, you're caregiving, you might be raising kids. We're all in different roles in caregiving. So I do appreciate you taking the time out today to join us. We did tape this, so I will be sending the link to everybody and also the PowerPoints. So with that, go forth. As Roseanne said, find your bliss in caregiving. I love that. Find your bliss, because even on the baddest days, we can find some joy in it. I remember when I was taking care of my mom, my favorite thing to do was look at her hands, and I used to always rub her hands with lotion and think of all the people she had touched in her lives with those hands. So that was my bliss, was my mom's hands. So everybody find their bliss in caregiving, and hopefully we will see you soon. Thanks from the IOG, and thank you for being here. We'll see you again. If you have any ideas, I'm going to leave this open, but for topics for next year that you would like to hear about, I already wrote down topics on resources such as the AAAs, Alzheimer's, and that kind of thing. But if you have anything that you'd like to hear about, I'd love for you to put it in the chat and we will put it in the works. So thank you, everyone. Take care.
And a big thank you to you, Donna, for coordinating this conference. We really appreciate you.
Donna.
Thank you. Thank you, Joan. I saw you on here. I was glad to see some familiar names on here. Gender disparity. That's a good one. Thanks, Lori. Any other ideas on topics before I close the meeting?
Thank you very much for this presentation.
Well, thank you for being here, John. I appreciate you coming and taking the time. Are you caring for a spouse, or who are you caring for?
My wife and I are caring for her 91-year-old mother,
Okay,
who is very alert and feisty,
yeah,
which is good. But yeah, she can. We were down in Indiana for a couple of weeks.
okay.
Yeah.
So you're doing it from a distance? She's not with you?
No, back and forth.
Okay, that's a lot on you for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Well-
good luck on your journey. If there's something we can do to help, or if there's some information we can provide, please do reach out to us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Now this is being recorded, so we'll be able to go back and watch
You
again.
certainly can. Yeah, I will send the link for the recording and a copy of all the slides, so you'll be able to physically see all the slides as well again, okay?
Okay, well, hey, thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you being here.
Okay, Donna. Take
All
care.
right. All right, well, thank you, everyone. I am gonna go ahead and stop the recording, and in the